After months and months of stagnation and attempted negotiations, it appears that we have finally reached a compromise in the United States Congress for the next COVID relief bill. The first COVID relief bill was passed many, many months ago, back, I believe, in March or April of this year, right after the pandemic first started affecting most people in the United States, and right after the shutdown started being implemented, the lockdown started being implemented, and right after a lot of people started losing their jobs. So back then, it appeared like this was only going to last a few weeks. So the senators and the House of Representatives members, they all rushed pretty quickly to create a bill meant to address the problems caused by this pandemic. So that first relief bill was passed pretty quickly. It only took a few weeks to get passed, and that gave every American, not every American, but many Americans, $1,200 in a one-time payment. Some people didn't get the full 1,200, but they got a little bit less than that, or not as much as that. It depended on what your income was in the previous year, I believe. It depended on how much money you made, essentially, whether or not you got the full 1,200. If you made more money, you would get the full 1,200. You get less, but if you weren't that rich, if you didn't have that much money on hand, if you didn't make that much money, then you would be able to get the full $1,200. A lot of people reported not being able to get the stimulus money at all, though, even though it appeared that they needed it. I guess the way that they decided who to give the money to wasn't that good of a system because it left some people who needed the money not having it, but regardless, a lot of people were able to get some help because of this relief package back in March or April. It was in the spring of this year, right after the pandemic first came to the United States and first started getting out of control. So this was the CARES Act, and its total budget was around $2 trillion. So in total, everything that was in that bill, it totaled up to around $2 trillion spent by the United States Congress, and this was used for a variety of things. One of the things it was used for was for the $1,200 that a lot of people got. Besides the $1,200, many people also got $600 a week up until the end of July, and the reason for that was because of unemployment. This relief bill back in March and April, the CARES Act, it also guaranteed $600 per week to anybody that was unemployed up until the end of July. And the idea was that by July, another relief bill would be passed. And they thought that, oh, July, that's plenty of time. Either the pandemic will end by then or we'll pass another bill by then. Here's the thing though, it is now December 20th, 2020. As I'm recording this, it's the night of December 20th, 2020. It has been so many months since that first relief bill, the CARES Act. It's been so many months since that was first passed. That was passed all the way back in the spring. Back then, July was way in the future. That was months away back then. July was months away then, but now July is months in the past. July was so long ago in terms of how long this pandemic has been going on for. July was almost 5 months ago at this point. It has been months since the benefits from unemployment expired, since those dried up. And it's been so many months since the $1,200 dried up for most people. So most people have not been able to get the help that they need in order to make it through this pandemic. And that is why a lot of people aren't able to make their payments. A lot of people are getting evictions, getting evicted from their homes. In a lot of places, there are regulations in place to make sure people can't get evicted, but even then, there are some people that have lost their homes. Some people don't have a place to stay because of these evictions and they can't pay their bills. So, a lot of people have gotten screwed over badly economically because of how bad this pandemic has been going on. And here's the thing, it's more than just the lockdowns that's causing the economy to be this bad. Even if you remove all the lockdowns, all the restrictions, most people aren't going to go out and go to the services they normally would use because the virus is still there. Most people aren't going to go out as much as they normally would until the virus goes away. And in order for that to happen, we need to have most of the United States, most of the people in the United States vaccinated. So until we get to that point, the economy won't improve so on its own. So the best thing that can be done is for people who are in need, people who are struggling to make their payments, they get the help they need, and it would be good for the United States federal government to step in and help those people out, but they have not been doing that for all these months. Throughout 2020, the federal government has not been doing an adequate job of helping its American citizens, helping out the American people make their payments and make it through this pandemic safely and securely. And it is just now, December 20th, 2020, that we're reaching an agreement for the second COVID relief bill. The first one was 9 months ago. That when they were able to get sorted out quickly. But then it takes 9 months to get the second bill sorted out quickly. I think that the United States Congress did an absolutely terrible job getting this out on time because it took them almost 9 months to get everything sorted out. I'm glad that they finally sorted things out and got this bill through, but it took way too long. They delayed this for way too long. They procrastinated way too much. I think that this should have came out maybe in like May or max July before the unemployment benefits ran out. Because now that's months in the past. It's been 5 months since those unemployment benefits ran out back in July, and it's been months since many people have been able to get the help that they need in order to make their payments, in order to make it through this pandemic. It's nobody's fault that this pandemic happened. Nobody really has control over this. The most you can really do is socially distance, wear the mask whenever you can, and not go out unless you need to. But also, having a job now is a lot more unsafe than usual, so that's another reason why a lot of people can't make their payments. Either they don't want to catch COVID, or they live with someone who's at high risk from this virus, so getting a job is too risky for them. There's all sorts of reasons why people might be struggling, might have been struggling in the past 9 months, and the fact that the federal government, the United States Congress more specifically, is just now coming to an agreement for the stimulus bill is absolutely abysmal in my opinion. But before we talk about what is actually in this bill, let's talk about how long it has actually taken for this bill to actually be finalized. So, at first, this bill could have was expected to come out in late spring, early summer. Back in May, the Democrats in the House that was controlled by the Democrats, still is controlled by the Democrats, but the House that was controlled by the Democrats had come to an agreement for a COVID relief bill, a second COVID relief bill. So that was back in May of this year, May 2020. The House had come to an agreement, but the Senate, that's controlled by the Republicans, they were not happy with that bill. Because here's the thing, generally, Republicans want to limit federal spending. They want to keep the debt lower. They want to keep the deficit lower. So they want to lower taxes, but they also want to lower federal spending. Meanwhile, Democrats are fine with slightly higher taxes, and they're also fine with slightly higher spending. So generally, in these sorts of bills, in these sorts of relief bills, Democrats are fine with higher budgets, but Republicans want to keep the budget as low as possible. So the Democrats came to a conclusion in the House, but the Republicans were not happy with that because they thought that the budget was too high, that the Democrats wanted too much money to be spent on this. I don't remember the exact amount. It was in the trillions. I know that for a fact. But so I just searched it up because I wasn't actually sure exactly how much money was going to be involved. But the Democrats in the House, in the COVID relief bill that would have been called the Heroes Act, they wanted to spend they wanted to spend $3 trillion on this second bill. So this was the Heroes Act. It was proposed in May in the Democratic controlled House, and this would have had $3 trillion used for this relief bill. But so this relief bill, the Heroes Act, the one that involved $3 trillion, this passed the House in May, but after it passed the House, it then went to the Republican dominated Senate. The $3 trillion bill, they thought that $3 trillion was way too much, and they wanted a lower amount of money involved in this bill. So they tried negotiating it out with the Democrats, but they couldn't come to agreement because Democrats wanted $3 trillion in their version of the bill that was called the Heroes Act. But then the Republicans in the summer of this year, summer 2020, they proposed an alternative called the HEALS Act. The Republicans proposed the HEALS Act, and this would have only involved around $1 trillion. The HEALS Act would have only costed $1 trillion, while the HEROES Act would have costed 3 times as much at $3 trillion. So there was a $2 trillion difference between what the Democrats wanted in the HEROES Act and what the Republicans wanted in the HEALS Act. So that massive disagreement is one of the main reasons why this took so long to sort out. And also the fact that Democrats control the House, but Republicans control the Senate, so there's all sorts of gridlock going on. This bill took months and months to finally come to a conclusion on, and it was supposed to come out in the summer originally, and then they were thinking maybe in the fall, maybe September, October, and then we slowly started to lose hope that this bill would even come out before the election. And then the election came around, and I guess now they finally decided how much they wanted to spend because in the upcoming COVID relief bill, it appears they were planning on spending only $900 billion on this bill. So I guess the Republicans eventually got their way because this is basically how much money they wanted to spend on the relief bill. They wanted $1 trillion, 900 billion is essentially that. But it's also only half of what was spent on the original CARES Act back in the spring. The CARES Act involved $2 trillion. This only has $1 trillion involved. This will only cost half of what the CARES Act costed. So I guess for Republicans that's a good thing because they want to minimize federal spending, and since they're spending less money on this bill than they would have otherwise than they did back in the spring, I guess that's a win for them. So let's go into more detail about what this bill has in store now. So they haven't actually voted on this bill yet. I would like to make that clear. They haven't voted on it yet, but it's likely that it will pass the Senate because the budget is basically what Republicans wanted. So if the Republicans dominate the Senate, then they should be able to get that through. But let's go into more detail now. So within that, what is included? This includes a $600 stimulus payment to certain Americans under a certain income level. So this is only half of what was given back in the spring. In the spring, people were given, certain Americans who made under a certain income level, they were given $1,200. They were given a $1,200 payment if they met the income requirements, meaning if they weren't that rich, they would get the money. But if you were rich enough to support yourself, then you wouldn't get the money. Like I said earlier in this video, some people needed the money, but because of the way they calculated, because of the formula that they used, they didn't get the money. So I guess the formula wasn't perfect, but a lot of people who needed the help, they got some help. But after that, like I said, most people were screwed because they didn't get any help from the federal government for months. But this payment's only going to be half of the spring one, 1,200 versus 600. So that's the first major difference from the CARES Act. By the way, I don't actually know what the name of this bill is going to be. The Democratic plan was the HEROES Act, the Republican plan was the HEALS Act. I don't know what this plan is going to be. I don't know what the final name is going to be. So you have the $600 stimulus payment, and besides that, you also have $300 per week in unemployment going out for the next few months. So this is also only half of what was originally in the first CARES Act because the CARES Act guaranteed unemployed people $600 per week until the end of July, which is now months in the past, like I said, but that was $600 per week, but this new bill is only $300 per week, so it's only half of the original CARES Act. Now, besides that, there's many other details in there, but the most important ones, in my opinion, are the stimulus payments and the unemployment benefits, because these are the payments that most directly help out the American citizens, especially the ones that are struggling to make it through this hellhole of a year that is 2020, that is soon to be 2021. I'm hoping that 2021 can be a lot better year, hoping 2021 can be the year that things get better, they make a comeback, but we're gonna have to see. I thought 2020 would be an okay year. I wasn't expecting too much out of it, but it's probably the worst year of my life, if I'm being honest. At least in terms of the world as a whole and what else happened. In terms of my personal life, I don't know if it's exactly the worst year, but definitely in terms of worldwide events and nationwide events, 2020 is by far the worst year of my life. So getting back to the topic now, I think that the stimulus payments and the unemployment benefits are the most important details of this plan, and it's kind of disappointing that these are only half of what they were back in the spring. I was kind of hoping it would be at least be as much, especially considering how many people really need those cash payments. Main thing for me though is that they wait this long. Both Democrats and Republicans failed to come to an agreement on this bill for so many months, like at least 6 months, if not more. The Democrats had their plan in May. The Republicans proposed an alternative in the summer. Then they couldn't agree, and it took them all the way until the end of 2020. This bill might not have become official until 2021, in fact, till the next year. So that's what really makes me mad, the fact that they took that many months to come to an agreement. And even then, the people who actually need the payments, they're only getting half of what they originally got several months earlier with the CARES Act. So that I'm pretty angry about, but I am happy that there's at least some sort of help finally arriving from the federal government that can be given to people who actually need this payment. I'm also hoping that some other things can be done to help out people, such as a temporary ban on evictions and a mortgage freeze. I would think would be nice, so people won't have to fear losing their housing. But I don't know about that. But the main thing is, I want people to be able to make their payments throughout these troubling times. Once the pandemic clears up, you can stop the cash payments. You don't need any new cash payments once this pandemic clears up, because once things return back to normal, there's no reason for people not to be able to get a job. Like, there's nothing stopping you then. People won't have to worry about getting the virus from their job. Now, because the virus is still here, getting a job can be pretty dangerous, especially depending on which job it is. But once the pandemic clears up, I think it's fine for people to get a job. I think that afterwards, you don't really need these relief bills, at least maybe for a few months after, because even after the pandemic clears up, the economic consequences of this pandemic will still be here for months after. So maybe in that aspect, I think that the federal government could step in bit more, even after this pandemic clears up. But I don't know. That's still months away. First, we have to get to the point where this virus is gone. That itself will be an amazing accomplishment in and of itself. If we can get to the vaccine, if we can get the vaccine to enough people to where this virus is not at all a problem in this country, that would be amazing. And afterwards, then we can worry about the economic impacts.